Hello again, audience. That is not a Tobuscus copy. Today I just wanted to read this hilarious fic I found. It's called No, Really, Meatballs Save Twilight's Life by Troll. This guy's a legend. He writes just the funniest fictions ever. Anyway, let us begin. It was a fine day in Equestria. Not only was it a fine day, it was also a very important day. Today was Pinkie Pie's birthday. Twilight had to make sure that she was looking her best for the party. Haha, ponies don't wear clothes. Twilight walked out of the library and trotted over to Sugar Cube Corner, where Pinkie Pie usually was. I didn't say Kinkie Pie. It was a particularly nice day, and Twilight and her friends decided that they would bring Pinkie Pie on, it's really weirdly written, on a picnic for her birthday. Twilight was supposed to bring Pinkie Pie to the park, where they would be waiting to surprise her. Twilight entered Sugar Cube Corner, calling out Pinkie Pie's name. "Pinkie Pie," she sang. The pink pony was nowhere to be found. Twilight looked around the room, but there was nobody there. Twilight let out a scream, but it was cut short by some pony's hoof. Some pony had grabbed Twilight and was now pulling her into the back separate room. It was Pinkie Pie. "Twilight, what are you doing here?" Pinkie Pie exclaimed. "I'm here to take you to the park," said Twilight, Pinkie's hoof removed from her mouth. "What? The park? Twilight, that's dangerous." "Pinkie Pie, what are you talking about? The park is very safe." "No, Twilight. Penguins." "What? The penguins are back." "Shit." Twilight took a step towards Pinkie and lowered her voice. "What weapons do we have?" Pinkie Pie shot a glance around the room to make sure nobody was watching. "Meatballs." Twilight nodded, and thus Twilight and her valiant friend Pinkie Pie found their way into the kitchen, where mounds upon mounds of meatballs were. Twilight took many of these meatballs, arming herself for the impending penguins. Suddenly there was a knock at the door. "Penguins," said Twilight. The door burst open and penguins rushed into the room. Twilight and Pinkie Pie looked at each other and nodded. With a snort, Twilight ran into the main lobby screaming, the penguins rushing into the store. Twilight turned to face the onslaught of penguins, and with her horn lit up like a light bulb, started to fire meatballs at the penguins. The penguins screamed with agony as the meatballs struck their feathers, causing many of them to go down. A couple of penguins were able to dodge the meat bullets and approached Twilight. Twilight did a backflip and revealed her meat rope. Using the meat rope, she lassoed a penguin and tugged hard at the rope mid-air, effectively choking the penguin. She then used her meat rope to whip a penguin into submission and then stuffed the meat rope in its mouth, causing him to choke to death. Twilight then took out a meat nade and ripped off the raw safety pin. She tossed it at the doorway where the penguins were entering. Before they had a chance to run, the meat nade exploded, killing many penguins along with the doorway. Twilight looked outside. "It's worse than I imagined," Twilight said. "They're everywhere." It was true. Penguins were everywhere. They were on the roofs, on the streets, in the sky, and inside the houses. Twilight looked back at Pinkie Pie while she had been busy raping penguins. Pinkie Pie wasn't able to defend herself and died a meaty death. "I must avenge her," said Twilight. Twilight's tongue extended from her mouth and snaked up into her eyeballs. She proceeded to lick tears out of her eyes. Twilight looked at the group of penguins on top of a house. They were trying to break the roof so they could get in the building. "Not on my watch," said Twilight. Out of nowhere, Twilight produced a meat launcher and loaded in a meatball. She put a hoof to the trigger and fired. The meatball travelled quickly, and in an instant the roof of the house blew up in a fiery, meaty explosion, causing all the penguins to die. The force of the explosion caused the house to crumble. The penguins all looked at their new enemy and started to swarm. Twilight put down her meat launcher and took out a meat flail, a ball nice and pointy. She smiled wide at the approaching penguins. Without thinking about the proper use of the weapon in her hand, Twilight flung the spiked ball and chain at a penguin, nailing him in the stomach, then produced 10 meat stars and threw them with ninja-like accuracy, effectively killing 12 penguins. She managed to get 2 double kills with the meat stars. Twilight's horn lit up, and she launched 100 meatballs into the sky. She fended off a couple of penguins with a meat sword, but after a couple of seconds, she grabbed her meat shield and put it over her head. The meatballs rained down from the sky, piercing multiple penguins in the hearts and killing them. Twilight saw that she was gravely outnumbered, so she ran back into Sugar Cube Corner, leaving a meat fall at the door. Leaving a racing meat fall. Using a meatonate, she detonated the meat fall as some penguins waddled in, effectively meeting them. Then, using the meat to the meat. What? Using meat to meet the meat. Twilight meated the meat that need to be meated. Using this meat, she meated the meat onto the meat, and she threw the meatball at the penguins outside. She plugged her ears, and the meatball exploded. Unluckily for Twilight, the penguins were still coming, and they were coming fast. Twilight ran up the meat case and to the top room. She sat on her meat couch to think. While pacing at the meat floor, she had an idea. She ran into the meat closet and opened it up, revealing the ultimate meat weapon. She took it out. It was an AK meat. She grabbed the weapon and stood at the staircase, watching the penguins waddle up. She pressed the trigger and yelled as she shot meatballs out of the AK meat, the penguins falling down the staircase and dying as meatballs ran upon them. Twilight ran out of ammo. She went back into the room and looked out the window. There were even more penguins! Shit! I need some firepower! Twilight said. Twilight looked over at the nearby table. There was a meat box. Twilight opened the meat box and looked at the meat button inside. She looked woefully out of the window and knew what she had to do. She pressed the meat button. All of a sudden, the meat roof and the meat floor began to open. Twilight stood staring. Meat-tits were rising from the... What? Meat-tits were rising from beneath the Sugar Cube Corner. A voice started to count down. When the voice reached 0, it said, "Meatballs." The meat-tits were launched in a meaty ball of fire and flew into the air. Twilight closed her eyes as the penguins started to swarm the building. The penguins were everywhere. In what seemed like forever, the meat-tits were flying. In a split second they hit the ground. The meteor explosion was devastating, wiping out all of Ponyville and leaving meat-eaten meat-tation for years to come. Luckily, Twilight had covered herself in meatballs, so she survived. Long story short, meatballs saved Twilight's life. The end. It was only later that Twilight learned that penguins didn't really exist, they were just hallucinations. The end again. Well, okay, once again, troll, you have entertained my afternoon. Thank you very much. Subscribe, listen, I hope to be doing more of these, but I don't know, I've been playing too much Man vs. Machine and sucking dick.